Looking at the reading two review questions, obviously the subject matter of this portion of Aristotle politics is disturbing. And I'm not here to apologize for Aristotle, but defend him. I'm offering this reading to you as being, I would say, an important one in the history of Western social thought. I don't think that importance is because it's true. I think importance because it's just there and it's been influential. There's no doubt about it. It's a defense of slavery, but it's a qualified defense, and it's not a simple defense, and it's not easy to really suss out exactly what Aristotle is saying here. And the first question I asked you is actually quite a difficult question. At the end of part 3, Aristotle refers to contemporary thinkers who, quote, affirm that the rule of a master over slaves is contrary to nature, and that the distinction between slave and freeman exists by law only, and not by nature, and being an interference with nature is therefore unjust. Now, that quote there, as I think I said in the video, really indicates that there was a controversy in Aristotle's time. There were people who thought that slavery was just, by definition, wrong. That is, there were people in ancient Greece who thought more or less like we do. Modern people who reject the very institution of slavery as a whole, as being indefensible and unjust in every case, which is, I think, interesting. Ancient Greece, the society or set of societies or culture, loose culture that Aristotle came from, was a slave-owning society. But that quote indicates that not everyone was comfortable with that. Aristotle more or less is comfortable with that and is really defending an institution of his own society against criticisms, but he's recognizing that there are plausible criticisms of it. So what reasons does he offer in the rest of the reading for his disagreement with them, with those people who condemn slavery as being unjust and against nature? That's not an easy question. To some degree, if you read closely, Aristotle concedes that slavery can be unjust, and in many cases is. One of the things he refers to is the practice amongst the Greeks when they were at war with each other. If one city conquered another, they would enslave the inhabitants. So even Aristotle couldn't defend that. I mean, in the sense that if you happen to be unlucky enough that your city loses a war to another city, and you are used to living as a free person and are then enslaved, then Aristotle, I think, concedes that that form of slavery is not defensible. Someone who's simply enslaved as a matter of just really bad luck. I think that he would concede that from what I've read. The kind of slavery or the kind of master-slave relationship that he's defending is what he says is slavery by nature. Now, there's slavery against nature, and that's when a free person who is fully capable of running their own lives and living as a free and autonomous individual is enslaved, just purely by an act of power. But Aristotle believes, and I think he's wrong. I think he's terribly wrong. But Aristotle believes there are other situations in which the slave is a slave by nature. That is, someone who is not really capable of being autonomous and running their own lives and is actually better off as a slave. Now, that, even to say those words, just sounds just terrible. But that's what he believed. He believed that there was a natural relationship in which a person who is, let's say, a rational individual who is knowledgeable and capable of making decisions would be in a master-slave relationship with somebody who wasn't capable of those things. And I suppose that's what we as modern people would just reject that. We'd say every person has the right to self-determination, freedom, and autonomy. And they don't have to earn that through some sort of idea of them being rational people or wise people. They just have it by nature. That's really the modern idea. So I would say that the answer to the question, what reasons does he offer for his disagreement with those who reject the institution of slavery is that he believes that there is a form of slavery, he believes, in which both parties, the slave and the master, profit. Of course, the master profits by exploiting the labor of the slave, but Aristotle believes the slave profits by being taken care of by someone who's wiser and better than themselves. Now, again, that just sounds terrible, but I think that that's generally his position, and I think it's an important position to deal with because despite its being kind of obviously untrue, I think a very influential way of thinking, maybe not so much defending the institution of slavery, but a very deeply entrenched idea in Western social thought until a certain period that some people are better off being taken care of by their betters. We'll see that that is a theme in Dante's Modern World Government. We'll see that that is a major thing that people like Wollstonecraft are fighting against when it comes to the relationship between men and women, etc. So, difficult question, difficult subject matter. And that idea of hierarchy or the need for one party to rule and one party to be ruled, let's say, comes up in this second question. In this reading, Aristotle defends slavery. There's no doubt he does. He also claims that, quote, the male is by nature superior and the female inferior, and the one rules and the other is ruled. What is your response? I would imagine that, I don't know, your response is whatever your response is. It's an open-ended question. But I wanted to reinforce by reference to that quote that Aristotle's way of looking at the world, especially the social world, is one that was widely shared by many thinkers, and perhaps to this day really is. There are certainly contemporary people who believe that there has to be a ruler and there has to be a ruled, and there are certainly people that I know of in America who believe that the male is the natural ruler over the female in a male-female relationship. I think there are still people who think like that, but I think it was a much more widespread idea before the modern period, which we'll be looking at. And by that I mean before the Enlightenment, before the rise of liberalism and individualism in the 17th and 18th centuries. Again, number 3 is really just a reference back to number 1, explain the distinction in part 6 that Aristotle makes between slavery by law and slavery by nature. I think that is a big distinction in Aristotle. Slavery by law is basically just slavery because someone is enslaved, where someone is unlucky enough to be taken captive, basically, and treated as an object and a thing because of, again, I think generally he's thinking of the practice of enslaving people who you've conquered in war. And that's where slavery exists just by convention and law. But he does believe that there is a slavery by nature, again, which is, I think, similar, but deceptively similar to the child-parent relationship. Of course, the child is not the parent's slave, but do you think he's thinking along those lines, where the parent pretty much makes decisions for the child for their own good? I think that he believes that slavery by nature is something like that. Again, these attitudes of slavery by nature, where supposedly both sides prosper, is definitely something you'll see in American history. Defenses of slavery in the antebellum South. I don't think they were true in ancient Greece, and I don't think they were true in 19th century America, but they were very influential, and a lot of people believed them. But that distinction between slavery by law and slavery by nature, I think, is really the key, I would say, to understanding Aristotle's ideas about slavery, and that while he would concede that slavery by law is probably unjust, his main defense of slavery is his idea of slavery by nature. Again, I'm not defending it, but it's there. And finally, the what quote do you think best exemplifies? That's just the thing I throw in every time to get your idea of what you think is most important about the reading.